Liz Cheney's voice cracked through the chamber like a whip, each syllable sharpened by years of entitlement and authority. She didn't just speak, she yelled, her words ricocheting off the paneled walls with the force of accusation. The courtroom seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her fury, the echoes vibrating like warning shots fired into the still air. And there, in the center of the storm, sat Jasmine Crockett. She did not flinch. She did not rise. She simply looked at Cheney, her lips curling into the smallest, most defiant smile imaginable. A smile so calm it turned Cheney's volume into noise, her thunder into static. It was the kind of smile that said, "I've seen louder storms than you." The audience felt it before they even realized it. The contrast was blinding. On one side, the former Congresswoman, her face flushed, her voice rising with the tremor of desperation. On the other, Crockett, silent, steady, a portrait of composure. The silence was not weakness. It was weaponized patience, the kind that makes a crowd lean forward, straining to hear the response that still hadn't come. Gasps fluttered from the benches. A man in the back muttered under his breath. Somewhere, a pen rolled off a desk and clattered to the floor, startling more than it should have. The air thickened. Heavy with the kind of tension that makes time drag its feet, Cheney's words rang like gunfire. Rapid, unrelenting, but the silence that followed was louder than any yell. For a moment, it seemed the world had stopped just to watch this tableau of arrogance clashing with unshakable calm. And that smile, sharp as a blade wrapped in velvet, was cutting deeper than Cheney's shouts ever could. The gavel didn't strike. The judge didn't intervene. The chamber belonged to the energy between the two women, one unraveling in fury, the other coiled in restraint, waiting. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a duel of symbols. Power inherited versus power earned. Entitlement versus resilience. And though Cheney's voice filled every corner of the room, it was Crockett's silence that claimed its center. In the next breath, Crockett's composure would do what no argument could. This was never just about two women in a courtroom exchanging sharp words. It was about something far larger, something pulsing beneath every raised voice and every steady silence. Who holds the power to define dignity in America?
Us.
Liz Cheney came armed not just with her voice, but with the weight of a political dynasty. The name recognition that bends headlines, and the assumption that volume alone can shape reality. In her, the audience saw more than one individual. They saw the echo of entrenched power, the shadow of elitism cloaked in righteous anger. Cheney's yelling wasn't just loud, it was symbolic. It carried the tone of authority that has for generations. Drowned out the voices of those told to wait their turn or speak more respectfully when all they wanted was the same seat at the table. Her posture, her glare, her insistence on dominating the space, this wasn't mere bluster. It was the performance of a system that survives on intimidation, one that wields its pedigree as both sword and shield. But sitting opposite her was Jasmine Crockett, and Crockett represented something very different. She wasn't bred for power, she had fought for it. She wasn't handed a stage, she had built her platform with grit, case by case, fight by fight. Often underestimated, often dismissed, and yet never broken. If Cheney's voice was the roar of establishment muscle, Crockett's silence was the voice of the people. The millions who have learned to navigate hostile rooms with poise, who have endured arrogance and yet found ways to thrive. That's why. The room held its breath. Because this wasn't just Cheney versus Crockett. It was privilege versus perseverance. It was the arrogance of assuming authority against the dignity of earning it. And in a country wrestling with questions of identity and truth, everyone watching felt the stakes rise with each passing second. The battle unfolding was about more than who could shout the loudest. It was about who America chooses to listen to when the shouting stops. Does truth belong to the one who interrupts, dominates, and demands obedience? Or does it belong to the one who stays composed, waits, and lets the weight of her restraint carry more power than the storm crashing against her? And yet, beneath the surface, something else simmered. Viewers knew instinctively that moments like this don't stay confined within courtroom walls. They escape. They ripple outward. The silence, the smile, the clash, it it was already writing itself into history, already sharpening into the kind of viral spark that spreads faster than any gavel can strike. In an age where perception is power, where the internet amplifies dignity just as quickly as it exposes arrogance, the outcome of this exchange would not be measured in transcripts or rulings. It would be measured in memes, in hashtags, in millions of clips replayed on endless loops, across screens from New York to Los Angeles. Cheney thought she was battling Crockett. In truth, she was battling a country tired of being yelled at, country hungry for leaders who reflect resilience instead of rage. And as she drew in her next breath, ready to unleash another barrage, the real drama was only beginning, because Cheney's next attempt to dominate the room would set the internet on fire. To understand why Liz Cheney's voice filled that room with such ferocity, you have to step back into the shadow of a dynasty that shaped her entire identity. Liz Cheney didn't simply arrive in politics. She was born into it. The Cheney name was currency, a ticket to power stamped long before she ever raised her first objection on the House floor. Her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, had wielded influence at the highest levels of government, cementing a legacy of hardline decisions that divided a nation and carved deep scars into American memory. For Liz, that inheritance was both her armor and her weapon. Observers saw it. The audience felt it. The clash was no longer just about what was said, but how it was said. And Cheney's style of dominance was betraying her in real time. She had walked into the room believing her family's name, her sharp tongue, and her fiery delivery would secure her the upper hand. But all those tools, honed over years of power, were turning into liabilities in the face of Crockett's unshakable calm. This was the great irony of Liz Cheney's legacy. The very attributes that had built her career, pedigree, volume, the aura of authority, were becoming the cracks through which her credibility was slipping. What had once seemed unshakable was unraveling in front of a live audience. One glance, one smile, one silence at a time. Because for the first time, Liz Cheney's volume was about to collapse under the weight of a smile. Jasmine Crockett did not enter politics through a family name, a dynasty, or a golden pathway paved by privilege. She entered through the grit of the grassroots, the kind of road where every step had to be earned, every inch of respect had to be fought for, and every victory came with scars. To understand why her calm smile carried more force than Liz Cheney's shouts, you have to understand where that composure was forged. She grew up in a world that rarely handed opportunity to women like her. Her early life was shaped by the quiet resilience of communities often ignored by those in power. Places where dignity was currency, where hard work was survival, and where every door seemed bolted shut until someone found the courage to kick it open. For Crockett, that courage wasn't optional, it was necessary. She learned early that silence could be weaponized against you. But she also learned the art of timing, the power of patience, and the strength in choosing when to speak. Before she ever stepped into a courtroom or onto a political stage, Crockett walked halls where her presence was underestimated. In law school, her brilliance was often overlooked by peers who assumed she didn't belong. In early legal battles, she was dismissed by opposing counsel who mistook her composure for weakness. And yet, in each of those moments, she discovered the same truth. Underestimation was not a burden. It was a secret weapon. Because when people assume you cannot rise, the shock when you do is seismic. As a lawyer, Crockett cut her teeth defending the voiceless, representing clients that the system had long abandoned. These weren't the polished, well-connected cases that earned headlines. They were the everyday battles. Workers denied their rights, families crushed under the weight of injustice, young people chewed up by a system designed to silence them. Crockett didn't just fight these cases, she lived them. Her empathy wasn't rhetorical, it came from the same struggles her clients endured. And that gave her a clarity that no amount of privilege could buy. But the courtroom was only the beginning. Politics, with its sharp elbows and closed circles, was an even harsher arena. Crockett entered with the same underdog status she'd carried her whole life. Opponents labeled her too emotional, too inexperienced, too radical. They tried to box her in with stereotypes, betting that the weight of dismissals would finally break her. Instead, she used each insult as fuel. Each time someone tried to silence her, she sharpened her voice. Each time they tried to belittle her, she raised her presence. Slowly, word by word, fight by fight, she carved her place in the public. Squared, what set Crockett apart was not just her resilience, but her ability to turn that resilience into grace. She didn't meet arrogance with arrogance. She didn't mirror hostility with hostility. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had already survived worse storms. The calm smile, seen in the courtroom when Cheney erupted, was not performative. It was earned. It was the smile of someone who had been dismissed 1,000 times before, only to outlast, outthink, and outshine every dismissal. And it was that quality, the unshakable composure, that made her magnetic to people watching from the outside. For anyone who had ever been underestimated, for anyone who had been told they weren't enough, Crockett was a mirror of their own struggles. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was carrying the weight of countless stories, countless lives, countless fights for dignity that too often went unseen. Her rise was more than personal. It was collective. By the time she entered that courtroom against Liz Cheney, Crockett was no longer just a woman with a legal and political career. She was a symbol. She was the embodiment of the idea that grassroots grit could stand toe-to-toe with dynasty power and win. Her strength was not in how loudly she could shout, but in how deeply she could resonate. That is why, when Cheney's voice thundered across the chamber, Crockett didn't flinch. She had been there before, countless times, facing down bluster and arrogance. Every trial she had endured had taught her the same lesson. Noise fades, but dignity echoes to some. Her silence in that moment looked like passivity. But to anyone who had followed her journey, it was electric. Because they knew what that silence meant. It meant she was waiting. It meant she was measuring. And it meant, when she finally chose to answer, the weight of her words would crush. Every ounce of Cheney's fury, every courtroom dismissal she had endured, every hostile sneer she had absorbed, every door slammed in her face, every headline questioning her worth, every sneering opponent who thought they could break her spirit, all of it had been preparation. Each trial had been a rehearsal for this moment, where privilege and arrogance would finally collide with patience and grace. And in that collision, Crockett's smile, quiet, calm, almost unshakable, was not just a reaction. It was the unveiling of a lifetime's worth of resilience. Every dismissal, every trial, every fight had prepared Crockett for this exact showdown. The courtroom air grew heavier with each word Cheney hurled, as though the very walls vibrated with the force of her fury. Her voice, sharp and unrelenting, lashed out like a whip. Rhetorical haymakers meant to bruise, meant to intimidate, meant to overwhelm. She pounded on points with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning by sheer volume. Her tones swelling, crashing, and echoing with authority she believed no one could challenge. "Let me tell you something, Cheneys." Words boomed, slicing through the murmurs of the audience. She jabbed her finger through the air, her face flushed with the kind of determination that can so easily blur into desperation. She spoke over interruptions, cut down imagined rebuttals, and declared herself the voice of reason by sheer force of decibels. Each sentence was a hammer striking down, daring anyone to rise beneath its weight. But Jasmine Crockett did not rise with volume. She didn't clench her fists, didn't raise her tone to match the roar that filled the chamber. Instead, she sat still, watchful, composed, her smile faint but unmistakable. It was not a smile of mockery. It was something subtler, sharper, a smile that told the room she wasn't playing Cheney's game because she didn't need to. If Cheney's strategy was a verbal storm, Crockett's was the mountain that endured it. She spoke sparingly, interjecting with surgical precision. Phrase here, a pointed question there, each one cutting through Cheney's flood of words like a scalpel through noise. When Cheney bellowed accusations, Crockett calmly asked for evidence. When Cheney leaned on legacy and power, Crockett simply redirected back to the people. Voices too often drowned out by politics played at full volume. It was a boxing match, but not one of fists. Cheney swung wildly with verbal blows, the thud of each one meant to stagger her opponent. Yet Crockett, instead of countering with brute force, slipped through every swing, letting Cheney's own weight carry her forward, leaving her off balance. Each calm sentence Crockett delivered landed not as a counterpunch, but as a precision strike, clean, undeniable, devastating in its restraint. The crowd felt the contrast like electricity. Whispers began at the edges of the chamber, audible, shifts in the air. Each time Crockett responded with calm precision, the audience leaned in, their gasps betraying just how sharp the tension had become. Faces in the gallery mirrored disbelief. How could Cheney be this loud, this relentless, and yet seem to lose ground with every passing moment? Cheney's voice climbed higher, louder, each word snapping against the silence Crockett left in her wake. But the more Cheney shouted, the more the silence carried weight. It was no longer empty space. It was Crockett's arena. Every pause, every calm glance, every unshaken breath turned the courtroom into a stage where Cheney's fury became noise, and Crockett's composure became command. At one point, Cheney leaned forward, practically spitting her words in a desperate crescendo. "This is about accountability. This is about truth," she thundered, her voice cracking under its own intensity. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Crockett to finally erupt, to meet fire with fire. But Crockett didn't. She tilted her head slightly, eyes steady, and answered in a tone barely above conversation, a single line that sliced through the storm, like lightning through a dark sky. And that was when the audience knew. The balance was shifting. Cheney's fury had peaked, but Crockett's calm had only just begun to unfold. The whispers grew into ripples, spreading across the chamber. As if everyone could sense what was about to come, that moment where noise would finally be silenced by clarity, and then, with one devastatingly calm sentence, Crockett shifted the entire balance. The silence that followed Cheney's last furious outburst was deafening. Her words still hung in the air, jagged and brittle. When Jasmine Crockett leaned forward ever so slightly, her calm smile intact. She did not rush. She did not interrupt. She let the moment breathe, and in that breath the balance of power shifted. Crockett's eyes locked on Cheney, and then on the audience. Her gaze moved slowly, deliberately, as though to remind everyone watching that this was not a fight of equals. It was a dismantling in progress. Her first words came not as a counterpunch, but as a whisper of certainty. "Congresswoman Cheney, I hear your volume, but what America is listening for is truth." The effect was immediate. A murmur rippled through the room. Cheney stiffened, her lips parting to interject. But Crockett didn't yield. She paused just long enough to make Cheney's interruption die in her throat. That pause, the silence, was Crockett's greatest weapon, and she wielded it like a master. With each sentence, Crockett slowed the tempo where Cheney had raced. Crockett now commanded time itself. She spoke as if every word carried the weight of generations. Her cadence was steady, unshaken, deliberate, and in that steadiness was a power Cheney couldn't match. "You say this is about accountability?" Crockett continued, her voice firm yet measured. "But accountability isn't proven by shouting down those you disagree with. It's proven by standing with the people who sent us here, by defending their dignity, not by dismissing it." A few heads in the gallery nodded, the whispers spreading faster now. Crockett's words weren't just arguments. They were affirmations, reminders of values buried beneath Cheney's noise. Cheney tried to interject again, her tone suddenly strained. "That's not," but Crockett raised her hand, not to silence Cheney, but to command the room's attention. Her voice stayed calm, even gentle, but the words cut sharper than any yell could. "You've had your turn. Now let's speak to what matters." The chamber erupted in gasps. It wasn't defiance, it was dignity, a line delivered with such calm authority that it froze Cheney mid-breath. Face tightened, her jaw clenched. But she knew what the room already knew. She had lost control. Crockett shifted her focus to the audience, broadening her scope. "This isn't about me. This isn't about her," she said, gesturing lightly toward Cheney without even looking at her. "It's about the America we all have to live in tomorrow. What America where power doesn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the truest one." The words landed like thunder, though spoken softly. It wasn't Crockett raising her voice that made them powerful. It was the fact that she didn't have to. Cheney's composure began to fracture. Her next attempt at rebuttal came out hurried, her tone higher, her rhythm broken. The cracks were visible now, her once commanding voice faltering under the weight of Crockett's poise, and the audience saw it, they felt it. The tension shifted fully, the whispers swelling into awestruck murmurs. Crockett pressed forward, each sentence crafted like a verdict. America doesn't measure leaders by family dynasties. America measures leaders by service. America doesn't honor those who yell the loudest. It honors those who listen, those who fight for justice even when the room tries to drown them out. Her smile returned, not wide, not boastful, but resolute. It was the smile of someone who had endured every dismissal, every insult, every uphill battle, and now stood unshaken. The smile unnerved Cheney more than any direct attack ever could. By now, Crockett wasn't just countering Cheney's argument. She was rewriting the story. The audience no longer saw two politicians in a clash of egos. They saw a woman embodying dignity against a figure unraveling beneath the weight of her own bluster. The atmosphere was electric. Reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Phones discreetly tilted upward as people tried to capture what was becoming the moment. Crockett's calm wasn't just surviving the storm, it was bending the storm into something unforgettable. And then came the line. The one that would be clipped, shared, replayed millions of times. Congresswoman Cheney, "History won't remember who shouted the loudest in this room. It will remember who stood for truth when the shouting stopped." The chamber fell silent. Cheney's lips moved as if searching for a retort, but no sound came. Her face flushed, her eyes darting toward the gallery, but the spell had been cast. It wasn't just Crockett's words, it was the stillness that followed them. That stillness became its own force, its own verdict. For the first time in the exchange, Cheney looked small, cornered not by insults, but by dignity itself. Crockett leaned back, her smile unwavering, and folded her hands in her lap. She had said what needed to be said. She didn't need to add more. The silence was the exclamation point. The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of energy. Gasps, murmurs, a few audible cheers quickly hushed by courtroom decorum, but the feeling was undeniable. Something irreversible had just happened. And in that moment, as Cheney's composure cracked and Crockett's calm radiated across the room, the internet was already taking hold. Done. Phones buzzed. Hashtags formed. And the spark of virality flickered into life. Clips of the moment shot across feeds in real time, captioned with words like legendary, savage, and unforgettable. In living rooms, on subways, in coffee shops across the country, people would soon replay that smile, that line. That silence, that silenced power itself. And in that breathless silence, the internet found its spark. The silence of that courtroom didn't stay contained. It leaped out of those walls, crossed airwaves, and within minutes became a storm that no one could stop. The first spark was a shaky vertical video posted on Twitter, just 11 seconds long. Cheney yelling, Crockett smiling, and that immortal line, "History won't remember who shouted the loudest. It will remember who stood for truth when the shouting stopped." The clip hit 500,000 views in the first hour. Then it was everywhere. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag Crockett Smile trended first, a celebration of the composure that had toppled the mighty. Then came hashtag Cheney Exposed, fueled by memes mocking her flustered face and desperate interruptions. And finally, hash debate flipped 20-5, a rallying cry, marking the moment when power tilted. When arrogance crumbled under the weight of dignity, TikTok stitched the moment into dozens of remixes. One viral edit paired Crockett's calm smile with slow-motion replay, backed by Beyoncé's Break My Soul. Another layered the silence after Crockett's mic drop with a bass drop. The audience gasp turned into a beat. Millions liked, shared, laughed, and applauded. On Instagram, carousel posts circulated, side-by-side screenshots of Cheney mid-yell and Crockett mid-smile. The caption read simply, "This is power. This is grace." The post hit 2 million likes in less than a day. Twitter became a theater of its own. Political commentators declared it a masterclass in composure. Activists called it the smile heard round the world. Even late-night comedians jumped in, one quipping, "Cheney brought a megaphone, but Crockett brought a mirror." Celebrities couldn't resist either. Kerry Washington tweeted a simple, smiling emoji with hashtag Crockett Smile. Mark Ruffalo posted, "This is why the people's voice matters more than dynasty politics." And Ava DuVernay wrote, "That smile wasn't silence. That was a whole sermon." The memes multiplied. Someone edited Crockett's smile onto the famous Mona Lisa. Another placed Cheney's flustered face into the infamous distracted boyfriend meme, with the boyfriend labeled America and the smiling Crockett as truth, even parody. Remixes of courtroom footage flooded YouTube, some racking up millions of views overnight. Meanwhile, Cheney wasn't just mocked, she was digitally dismantled. Clips resurfaced of her shouting down opponents in past hearings, juxtaposed with Crockett's poise. Commentators asked, was it ever strength or just volume? Everywhere you looked, Crockett wasn't just winning an argument, she was becoming a symbol. Her calm composure was reframed as resilience, her silence as power. For young women of color scrolling their feeds, the smile became more than a meme. It was validation, a reminder that dignity could stand toe-toot with dynasty and wind in classrooms. In dorm rooms, on buses, kids reenacted the scene. TikTok duets popped up where users stared calmly at their cameras, while imagined voices yelled off screen, ending. With a knowing smile, they tagged it, hashtag Crockett Challenge. Within a week, the challenge had over 100 million views. Cable news couldn't keep up. Segments ran with bold headlines, "Crockett's smile breaks the internet." Pundits debated whether this was a turning point in political discourse. Was America tired of the loudest voice? Is dignity finally reclaiming its place? But the people didn't need pundits to tell them. They felt it. They saw it. In their timelines, in their laughter, in their admiration. For once, politics had delivered not just another shouting match, but a parable. A story that validated what so many already knew. Power without composure is weakness. And Cheney? She tried to fight back. A statement was released the next morning, accusing Crockett of hiding behind theatrics and refusing to engage in serious debate. But it rang hollow. The internet had already written the story. Cheney's words read like echoes, while Crockett's smile lived on like a flame. The hashtags didn't fade. They grew. Hashtag Crockett's smile became more than a meme. It became a banner. At rallies, protest signs bore the phrase. Merch flooded Etsy overnight. Shirts, mugs, stickers, all adorned with Crockett's.com grin. What Cheney had framed as silence, the people reframed as strength. And as the digital storm swelled, something deeper began to stir. Beneath the laughter, the memes, the remixes, a question lingered. What if this wasn't just entertainment? What if this was a glimpse of what America could be, where dignity defeated noise, where truth survived the shouting? Because behind the hashtags, a deeper lesson began to sink in. In the end, it wasn't Cheney's shouting that people remembered. It wasn't her anger, her privilege, or even her words. It was Crockett's calm smile, the quiet defiance that outshone every yell, every insult, every attempt to dominate. That smile didn't just win a moment. It reframed what strength in America looks like. Because true strength has never been about who can scream the loudest. It has never been about inherited power or family dynasties pounding the table to remind us they exist. True strength is about restraint. It is about clarity. It is about dignity under fire. Liz Cheney's yelling became the perfect symbol of arrogance dressed up as authority. She embodied a kind of politics that believes might makes right, that believes intimidation is persuasion. But Crockett's smile cut through that illusion. It reminded everyone watching that composure, steady, unshaken, immovable, carries a power that no volume can match. That is why her smile went viral. Not because it was clever, not because it was meme-worthy, but because it told a deeper truth. People are hungry for, in a noisy world, dignity is still possible. In an America divided by shouting matches and power struggles, grace can still win. Think of every immigrant who has ever been talked over in a boardroom. Every young woman who has been dismissed in a classroom. every working-class American who has been told to know their place. Crockett carried them all in that smile. She showed them, and us, that silence, when it comes from a place of unshakable confidence, is not weakness. It is victory, and isn't that the American story at its best? The idea that you don't need to inherit power to stand in your truth, that resilience, patience, and dignity can dismantle even the most entrenched arrogance. Moments like these remind us that America is not defined by those who yell the loudest, by those who stand their ground with quiet conviction. Crockett's smile wasn't just about her, it was about us. It was about a nation weary of chaos, longing for composure. It was about communities that had been silenced, suddenly seeing themselves reflected not as victims but as victors. It was about dignity finally triumphing over ego, and that is why people clung to it. Why it spread from phone to phone, screen to screen, until it felt less like a viral clip and more like a cultural reset. Somewhere inside we all recognized the truth it carried. When arrogance meets composure, arrogance always falls. In that courtroom, Crockett didn't just defeat Cheney's argument. She reminded America of who we are when we're at our best. A country that respects dignity over bluster. A country that believes justice doesn't need to scream to be heard. A country where, even in the face of arrogance, the quiet voice of truth can still cut through. That is the moral of this moment. Not that one politician outwitted another, but that dignity still has the power to lead. Crockett's smile was a mirror reflecting back to us the version of America we want to believe in. The America where justice is calm, where strength is measured, and where arrogance has no lasting hold. And as the world replayed that moment again and again, the lesson only grew louder. Composure is greater than chaos. Dignity is greater than arrogance. And in moments like these, America remembers who we are. But even as the nation soaked in that, one final question remained, the one that would turn reflection into action and admiration into movement. Liz Cheney came into that room believing volume could replace truth. She tried to shame Jasmine Crockett, to rattle her, to force her into a corner. But Crockett never raised her voice. She never matched the chaos. She let her calm smile do the work, and in the end, that single act dismantled Cheney's entire argument. That is why this moment matters, because it shows us something bigger than one debate. Shows us the eternal balance between power and dignity. Power screams. Dignity listens. Power demands attention. Dignity earns respect. And every time history gives us these clashes, we're reminded the shouting always fades, but the truth remains. Crockett didn't just win a point against Cheney, she revealed a principle. That in America, no matter how loud arrogance gets, dignity will always be stronger. That is the story people will tell tomorrow, next week, and for years to come. Not the noise, but the composure that silenced it. And that's why we built this channel. To capture moments where the balance shifts, where truth cuts through arrogance, where everyday people see themselves reflected in leaders who rise with dignity, not with ego. If you believe composure should always triumph over arrogance, if you believe dignity should always silence bluster, if you believe America is at its best when justice is calm and unshakable, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now. Share this story. Join us at Inside Power, where we don't just watch history unfold, we hold it up to the light. Moments like these remind us of who we are and who we're still meant to be. And the next clash, the next viral reversal, you'll want to be here when it happens.